Welcome. I'd like to call to order the Town Council joint work session with Coastal Resources Management Council, Tuesday, March 29th. The time is 7:10. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The legislator is on the end.
First of all, I would like to welcome everyone to the South Kingstown Town Chambers to engage in such an important dialogue with our Matunic Beach erosion. I'd like to take this time to thank our audience, to thank our town staff, most importantly, our Coastal Resource Management Council, our senators, Senator Cisnowski, Representative Donna Walsh, our town council here, as well as we have some representatives here in the audience. We have Nancy Landgrill also here from Senator Jack Reed's office. So thank you. If you did not receive an agenda, there is some agendas outside the door here. The discussion tonight on Matunic area coastal erosion issues. We'll be discussing solutions, looking at the brief history, some regulatory requirements, technical feasibility, long-term and short-term plans for our Matunic Beach. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Taconian, our Director of Coastal Resources Management Council, for some introductions. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Is this on? Madam President, members of the South Kingstown Town Council, thank you very much for this opportunity to come here this evening. And thank you for passing your joint resolution requiring that this meeting take place. But I also would like to thank Senator Susan Cisnowski and Representative Donna Walsh. It was their leadership that brought this state agency to the table this evening for this very important matter. I'd also like to recognize to my right and everyone's left the Vice Chairman of the CRMC, Paul Lamont. To my extreme left and your right, Ron Gagnon, who's the DEM representative. He's sitting here in place of DM Director Janet Coit, who's out of town. And I've been in touch with her and actually spoke to her this morning with regard to this meeting, and we'll be briefing her again. To my left and your immediate right is John Longo, the attorney for the CRMC. And in the audience, we have staff members Jim Boyd, Grover Fugate, Jeff Willis, Dan Goulet, and Janet Friedman that will make a presentation and answer some of your questions. If I may, before we begin, just set some ground rules with respect to the CRMC. As members of our body, as many may know, that we are a quasi-judicial body, and as a result of that, we are not at liberty to speak on any specific violation that may be out there or any specific application that is either pending or will be applied for. Short of that, we may discuss policies, listen to your thoughts, and hopefully receive some very good recommendations from our staff that we think hopefully will correct the problem or ease the problem, and as always, listen to the officials of the town of South Kingstown. So with that, Madam President, I turn it back to you, and thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I too would like to also note that we have representative from Sheldon Whitehouse's office. We also have Tony Simon in our audience, so thank you, Tony. And I would also like to thank Carol Hagan McEntee, one of our town council members, for bringing this resolution forward. And I believe there was another resolution prior to that by town council Jim O'Neill. I just want to start by just giving a brief history. That resolution was passed on January 24th. This resolution concerning the impact of coastal erosion in Matunic. And the resolution included some language with severe coastal erosion continues to have an impact on the health and safety of this coastal area and the town of South Kingstown, and that Coastal Resources Management Council please meet with the town council, town officials, residents, business owners to address this problem. So this is what brings us here tonight. We did have a preliminary meeting on February 18th, which was a wonderful meeting. We were able to have great dialogue, and the staff has prepared this agenda along with CRMC tonight. So with that, I just want to give you a brief history before we get into a dialogue here at the table. The town of South Kingstown for approximately 15 years has been battling this issue. I can remember a meeting at Matunic Elementary School where there was a large turnout. I think the auditorium was, the cafeteria was filled with concerns, and we ended up having a great dialogue that night, but really nothing came to fruition. At this time, we have had a myriad of memorandums going back and forth with the town on the meeting with the Coastal Resource Management Council on February 18th. Some of the things that were discussed was shoreline classification changes, possibly from a type 1 to a type 2. We talked about some special exemptions under Section 130 of the Red Book with CRMC that would permit construction of some hard man-made shoreline structures. We also talked about some Matunic Beach protection with filling out some pre-permits with CRMC that would allow us, in case of a severe storm, to put up some structural sheeting to protect our Matunic area, and then some experimental protection options. So at that time, we talked about some applications. I believe that those are still in the works of being prepared. Hard structures, soft structures, changing type 1 to type 2. And at this time, if anybody would like to add any further comments with any of the discussions that we had, if you want to join back in, Mike, feel free. So we're looking at the next steps, and the last thing that I want to do is just define what a public work session is. This is a time for the audience to watch the town council work with CRMC and the staff, and there will be an opportunity at the end for public input. If we get into certain lengthy dialogue, I may stop the meeting and take public comment at that time. So you will be heard, and we will make sure that we have lots of time for that. So at this time, I'm going to open the meeting. Go back to you, Mike, for discussion.
Well, I guess the best way to begin this is to go down the agenda, and let's start off, I guess, with item number 4 and call on Mr. Fugate and have him present his presentation with regard to discussion of what his recommendations are to the council and to the South Kingstown Town Council. Mr. Fugate?
Welcome.
Thank you.
See you again.
The meeting that we had on February 18th was regarding the council's current policies regarding the shorelines, and particularly the Matunic area where there is an erosion problem. As most of the people in this room are aware, our shoreline all around Rhode Island is experiencing erosion problems, and there are a lot of issues associated with that. However, We were discussing in particular the policies of the council for this Type 1 shoreline. Type 1 shoreline in Rhode Island has contained within those policies a prohibition on structural shoreline protection. And that's for the entire South Shore primarily, to preserve the sediment supply for our beaches and to ensure the continued viability of the beaches in these areas. As part of those discussions, however, we looked at the Matunic area in particular, and the staff and I drafted up a memo, which is dated February 25th, that outlines some of the options that could be considered for this area. The first is actually pursuing a man-made shoreline under the current regulatory program. Even though it's prohibited, there is a provision that allows for the construction of shoreline protection where the primary purpose of that is for a public purpose. So in the discussions with the town, there was a possibility of creating a linear park through the construction of a shoreline facility. And if that park and structural protection was primarily there also to provide public access, that could meet the definition within the contained within the plan as currently outlined within the coastal program. So to that, they would have to obviously meet certain burdens that are contained within Section 130, and that is to show that there really are no other viable options, that it's the minimum necessary, and that it's to accommodate a public purpose. Typically, this is for public infrastructure, such as sewer lines or other types of transportation corridors that are public in nature. So, but by definition within the CRMP, the Coastal Resources Management Program for the state of Rhode Island, public access is defined as a water-dependent use and eligible for this special exception criteria. The other option is to change the water type from a Type 1 to a Type 2 in this area. Type 2 waters do not have the prohibition for structural shoreline protection. Typically, we encourage people to pursue options of non-structural, but if they prove viable in many of these areas, then they can then pursue an application for structural shoreline protection. So that would be an option that would require the council to go forward on a rule change. They would have to delineate the boundaries of that and then pursue an option of changing that water type from Type 1 to Type 2 that would then permit structural shoreline protection. The options, as indicated, we provided also some background in terms of Section 130 in terms of the obligations. There was another option that has been looked at, but really doesn't appear to be viable in this one, and that is to reclassify the area or acknowledge that as a man-made shoreline. But usually those are areas where there's a heavy predominance of existing structures, and you're looking at an infill situation of maybe one or two lots in between the heavy predominance of man-made structures within those areas. That option really didn't appear to be viable given the area and the overall pattern of development for that area. The other option to at least address the town's needs in this area, which we've been working with the town on, was to pre-permit a structural protection measure so that once the erosion reaches a certain point, that it automatically authorizes the town to step in at that point and undertake structural protection of that area to protect the road and sewer line. And we've been working with the town to put that permit in place so that if we have a storm event that is of a magnitude that would cause erosion in this area to reach that point, that the town would be already set in place to move forward with that. We've also considered and looked at, and staff is still drafting up some guidance, the possibility of allowing some temporary measures in terms of providing some temporary relief in this area while the long-term measures are being sought. But they would have to be acknowledged, as I indicated, as temporary and not a long-term solution. The problem that we have is that the permitting in this area is, as soon as you touch the mean high water mark, you bring in a set of federal regulations and federal permitting entities that become involved, and the permitting becomes much more difficult in these situations just because of the complexities associated with all the various federal statutes that come into play at that point. So there may be prolonged permitting periods that would be necessary for some of these options that require that the council may want to consider at that point temporary measures to be put in place. So those are the options that we put forward as a result of the meeting on the 18th for consideration and discussion. So.
Thank you.
Any questions?
At this point, we'll take questions here from the table. Jim?
I don't know why the delay to type 2 from type 1. This has been a problem which, frankly, we ought to be grandfathered under. We've been after this problem for 5, 10, 15 years. I saw the incredible combination of federal permitting now that mean high water will probably bring forward, and somehow or another we need to look at this over a 10, 20-year average. I think we were on time, but we had no help doing things here. My biggest question is, beside the town's water lines going down there, changing to a type 2, how can you tell us how we can help the residents down there and do something else beside the burritos? What we need, just to cut to the chase, we need a cheap way to protect the property owners down there while you and our officials here work on a longer-term problem with the feds and the states. What can you do for us in that world?
Well, that was one of the options that we looked at in terms of the potential for temporary structural measures. We had looked at this situation a number of years ago. John Boothroyd, who's here, is a coastal geologist with Professor Emeritus, I guess now, with the University of Rhode Island in the Mesquamacut area. And one of the potential solutions that is out there is the installation of wood sheet pile within these areas that would act as a temporary solution. The problem with any of these measures is that as soon as you hit the water, you do invoke the federal actions. But in addition, most of these measures, if we receive any type of significant storms, they will not protect any of these properties from any significant storm. The structures will likely fail in a significant storm, and some of the temporary measures may contribute to some of the damage that may be to adjacent structures. So it's a very difficult issue. In addition, the ones that do undertake the temporary measures may transfer the problem to the adjacent properties, and that thereby creating somewhat of a nuisance situation to the adjacent properties. So unless it's undertaken as a unified approach, you potentially transfer that problem and then also result in potential failure into the gaps that may be created during this. So while these are measures that somewhat help, there is in this situation not a very good answer for any of this, short of building a large-scale riprap revetment. And in this case here, in this storm surge that we could see during hurricane events is well over 20 feet tall in these areas. That's the only thing that will protect these structures from major storm events. So what we're talking about is really minor event protection. So that's something that should be clear to everybody as we start this process.
Yeah, I don't disagree that we should, and most everyone I've talked to down there agrees that it needs to be unified.
Yep.
It has to be all one. Obviously, we know what happens if your neighbor
Right.
doesn't comply, no question about it. I guess my biggest concern is we never see any new technology options from you. Give us a chance. All we do is get a fine, or we have your police come down here. All we get is a reprimand. You're being too regulatory. We need you as an advocate. This is the problem, an advocate.
We constantly scan all the literature, all the scientific studies that are available on erosion and erosion abatement to see if there is anything out there that will, one, halt the erosion, but two, also provide for the benefits that we receive out of the natural shoreline system. If there was such a system out there, it would be the silver bullet for most of the United States, which is in this problem, as well as many portions of the world. It just doesn't exist, unfortunately, but we do constantly scan for it. Our staff attends conferences. They make themselves knowledgeable in terms of all the latest literature on it. But I just wish there was something that we had that more to offer you than what we have right now, but it just doesn't exist at this point.
Councilwoman Paglietti.
About how long would it take to change to type 2 from type, sorry. How long would it take to change the category to type 2 from type 1?
As I indicated, it would have to go through the regulatory process. So the boundaries have to be set for that water type change in terms of the two endpoints. And then that goes out to a 30-day public notice, which then also schedules that for a public hearing before the full council. If the council were to adopt that, then it gets registered with the Secretary of State's office within the next day or so after the council hearing, and then becomes law or full force of the effective regulations 20 days thereafter of registration with the Secretary of State.
So it would be approximately 3 months?
Approximately,
Total
yes.
process. Thank you. And have one other question. Have the burritos worked anywhere?
The burritos are working. They require maintenance, but they do, because of their sheer mass, tend to absorb a lot of the wave energy. I mean, we've seen these systems in place during the Patriots Day storm, which pretty well approximated a hurricane storm surge event. They took a beating, but they stayed in place and required maintenance afterwards. I mean, they're not a perfect solution themselves, but they do seem to have enough mass to withstand the storm events.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Fogarty.
Getting back towards federal help, because obviously this is happening across the country. Do you see any loosenings of any guidelines by the federal government on dealing with erosion? I mean, there was an article not too long ago with California, or even it's right up to where they roller skate in Venice Beach and so forth. I mean, it's happening everywhere.
It is.
And we are constrained by some of the federal, I should say, statutes that are in place.
Yeah.
We're shrinking, and we need to. Obviously, we need help from the federal government here, and some of it could be some relief on what we can do. And I understand, as we pointed out earlier, that we have to protect, everybody. But again, is there any changes, or do you see any changes in the future as far as federal?
Well, most of what we see in terms of the response of the federal government these days, in terms of some of the erosion that's occurring, are these massive beach nourishment projects that you usually see down in Maryland, New Jersey, other areas. Florida also undertakes a lot of beach nourishment. A lot of that is funded by hotel taxes and whatnot that are put on these places. But that's been the typical response for this. The problem that you have is that many of those areas that do receive that, it's done on the Army Corps has what's called a cost-benefit analysis. So they have to look at the flood protection benefits that are received from those structures versus the cost. And in places like Ocean City, Maryland, and other places in New Jersey and whatnot, there are usually enough high-rise development in those areas, multi-story hotels and whatnot, that would justify the cost benefit. In areas where you have single-family residential homes, you don't typically see those large-scale projects because they just can't seem to meet the cost-benefit analysis for those. So unfortunately, that's the situation. The other thing is that as you go forward, it really depends on the areas and the issues that you run into. There are, for instance, in this state, piping plover, which are an endangered species, and if they're present within the area, there are Endangered Species Act provisions that come in that can complicate an issue very quickly. So a lot of the regulations and approaches are very area-specific in terms of what federal statutes get invoked and whatnot. But again, the federal government does a lot of research. The Army Corps has a research lab that looks at these issues, but we're not aware of anything that can abate the erosion without causing a detriment to the beach or to the sediment supply in the system.
Councilwoman Hagan McEntee.
I'm looking at the special exemption that that the town could apply for under Section 130 of the Red Book, and it seems to me, since we have a problem with protecting the road that ultimately gets to the people, and we have an infrastructure there that needs protection, couldn't we avoid all the federal red tape trying to go the type 1, type 2 route and protect the properties on the beach, which would ultimately protect the road? So, any protection we get there protects the road. So why just protect the road? Invoke the special exemption and allow them to protect the beachfront, which ultimately protects the road, which
Right.
brings it into the public safety issue.
Okay, couple of points. The type 1 and type 2, that doesn't necessarily invoke federal jurisdiction. It's just when anything that's being proposed touches the mean high water mark, that particular portion of the project or project then invokes the federal jurisdiction. So going from type 1 to type 2 merely takes it out of a prohibition characterization and puts it in more of a permissive stance by the council, whether they'll allow it or not.
So we'd still have to go, so you're saying because the water is so close to the,
Right.
has come so far inland that we have to go with the
Right.
federal?
If you start to fill out into an area where you go out into and you touch the mean high water mark, that's where the federal jurisdiction comes into play at that point. In terms of the special exception, what we were looking at, and the reason we were focusing in on the public access component of that, is if this was strictly a situation where the town was trying to protect the road and the water line, that would be protecting public infrastructure. But if you're stepping out beyond that and you're now trying to protect private property, you can make the case that that is also trying to protect that infrastructure, but it would have a greater chance, I think, of prevailing if it also had public access component to it. That's why we were highlighting that. But there's nothing to prevent the town from going forward with that option, but it's likely because of trying to establish a unified bulkhead line and trying to protect those properties that some portion of that project's likely to hit the mean high water mark and then bring the core jurisdiction into play.
But it would probably be a smaller amount of property that would come into the high water line mark. I mean, it's not all within that, the entire area.
No, it's not all. I'm not sure what the percentage is, but it's not all. That's correct.
And could you just explain what this burrito is? Is it just a huge sandbag?
Essentially, yes. It's a very heavy-duty sandbag, but because of its sheer mass, it tends to resist movement. The smaller bag systems get thrown around easily, they disintegrate very rapidly, and they aren't as resilient to storm effects as these bigger structures. The bigger structures, the actual material that they're made out is much more resilient, and the sheer weight and mass of that bag tends to resist it getting thrown around.
And that would be allowable under the present
I can give you a permit for that today.
And how long are they? I mean, how far do
They vary in
stretch?
size. Janet, do you want to, why don't you?
They come in fiber.
Yeah.
Could you just state your name, Janet?
Yes, my name's Janet Friedman, Freedman, and I'm the geologist at Coastal. And the burritos, what you get is a fiber they come in rolls and they're made out of coconut fiber, so it's a mat. So you can actually stretch them out to whatever size you want, different sizes and shapes, and you sew them together. You fill them with sand and you sew them together.
And do they work better than the sandbags?
Yeah, they do. They're like a giant sandbag. So as Grover says, you have a lot of mass in one bag so it doesn't move in place. The sandbags would work if they didn't move around, but they tend to be tossed around in storm waves, so they end up all over the beach and disappear very quickly.
It's more friable, so it disintegrates faster in the storm.
And is that the only option other than sandbags, is the burrito? Is there any other option that the people or the businesses can use at this point?
Well, as I indicated, one of the options that the council could consider is authorizing this temporary measures, but the temporary measures are temporary, and they still don't provide a very high level of protection for these properties.
And what
So
would that be? What would those temporary
those
measures
would be essentially wooden sheet pile that's driven in front of the erosive face right now to protect it. But they're going to need to gain access to the beach to be able to get down to do that, and because of how close the water is in some of these areas, that could be difficult trying to gain access and drive some of these structures in during this point in time. So it gets back again to that whole issue of making sure that if you do this, you should have a unified approach to this, because if there's any gap in the system, you'll get failure during an event of those adjacent structures, and a lot of associated problems with that. The other thing is that depending on how successful they are in driving the sheet pile, if they only get a shallow embedment during a storm event, that sheet pile can become a battering ram once it gets taken up and then floating with the system. So,
Mike Takoian.
I have a question, if I may. I know we've heard a lot of the bureaucracy and a lot of the rules, and I have to agree with the council members that this agency also has to serve as an advocacy agency as well. But I think we have an immediate concern here, and we're hearing some of the long-term concerns, Grover, but I think at the end of the day, we have some businesses that are in jeopardy of falling in the ocean. And I think they want some immediate concerns, and they want to hear something today as to what they can do. And something that I had pledged to this town, South Kingston Town Council, that I would get the CRMC together to act on something quickly with your recommendation. I think it's important that the CRMC staff come up with a recommendation on something they could do today, something they do next week, not 3 months from now, not 6 months from now, and not listen to all the federal and state issues. I think that is the responsibility of CRMC staff to make that recommendation to us, so that way there is something that we can act on that can prevent these businesses from closing and displacing all their employees. So is there something that you can recommend to this body that we can act on within the next month or so, 45 days, 60 days, so that way we can protect these properties?
well, the only thing that would be available within that time period is for the council to authorize this temporary placement of this wooden bulkhead system. That's the only thing that's available at this point that could start to deal with some of the erosion issues until a longer-term solution is pursued. But again, without a unified approach, there's going to be problems associated with that. So.
Other than Steve Alford having big, deep pockets that I know about, where would the money come from to do this work?
Well, most of the work, from what I understand, is either in front of the private businesses or private homes. So I imagine it would be a situation where the private property owners would be undertaking this work.
That if the private party said, you know, my next door neighbor's going to do it, but I can't afford to
Right.
do it, then you've got the problem that we've been
That's
talking
correct.
about all along. So you've got to have a unified, everybody's got to do it or nobody does it.
That would be the best approach.
But again, the question then becomes, South Kingston is like most communities, it's fairly well strapped, and the state is strapped. Does the federal government have any money? I know they can print it quicker than we can. And I'm trying to be realistic, because
I know.
so many of these problems that we face, the bottom line is who's got the money to take care of that?
There are no current federal programs that I'm aware of, Paul, that would allow this. And certainly that the federal officials are here tonight so they can speak for themselves on it. But we've looked into the issue to try to see what federal funding might be available to assist in this. And it's very limited. Each of the federal agencies has essentially their hands tied in dealing with these issues. For instance, if you bring the Army Corps in to look at a structural shoreline protection issue, it has to be authorized by Congress. It has to meet those cost-benefit ratios, and it's unlikely that they would be able to do that in this area. So each of the particular funding sources has a series of problems associated with it.
I'm going to now second what Mike was saying. The frustration, and I've talked to some of the people that have it, the frustration has gone beyond the point of boiling. We've been talking and talking and talking. Now what are we going to do?
Yeah.
And it's like the dog chasing his tail, I guess, because we can identify the problem. If we could get that short-term solution, it might make sense while we're exploring the
Right.
other. But in the meantime, the bureaucracy has got to move. And I don't know the answer, and I don't know that you do.
I don't either.
At this point, Representative Walsh, did you have some comments? Senator Sosnowski?
I'm very frustrated by the length of time this has been going on. But back on February 18th, the question was asked, would CRMC support a type 1 to type 2 change? And you mentioned that you couldn't take a definitive position
That's
until
correct.
you ascertained what impact it would have statewide. Now that was February 18th. Have we any definitive answer on this yet, or when
Well,
will we?
yeah. The problem, and as I indicated at that time, once we say yes to the Matunic area, then I have to figure out how that's different than any other piece of shoreline that we currently prohibit structural shoreline protection on. And I don't know what those differences are right now. In other words, I don't know how to say yes to Matunic and no to everybody else that also is looking for this particular solution. If you take the structural shoreline protection measure off, essentially what you're going to end up with is a series of walled enclaves along the South Shore, which will seal up the sediment source. And we've had discussions with John about what the potential impacts that does to the long-term sediment supply to the beaches, because without that sediment supply, the beaches will start to accelerate in their erosion phase. We just don't have the studies or information to understand those dynamics. And that's the unfortunate position that we're in, is I can't give you an answer that would give you any degree of reliability that once you start saying yes to these particular projects, that you're not going to have an impact. You will lose lateral access in most of these areas because the beach will retreat rapidly within these areas. Those structures will be set up for greater damage from storm events due to the deepening of these areas. And we will lose the long-term sediment supply that our beaches depend on. So there's a whole host of consequences that comes with those decisions too, and I don't have the answers to the sediment dynamics.
Senator Sosnowski, before you speak, can I just add to Representative Walsh's comment? Grover, at the February 18th meeting, you made the statement that you had not brought it to full council. Since that meeting, have you brought it back to the full council for any kind of a discussion, and what were some of the talking points?
This meeting was an attempt to start to bring this to the full council for their consideration and looking at. So this is the first step in that process.
Okay, thank you. Senator Sosnowski?
Thank you, Council President. I used to be a council member, as you know, Grover.
Yes.
And it's been a little while since I've seen the Red Book, but I know it often gets changed with regulations and so forth. But does the Red Book speak to emergency measures at all?
It does, where there is a potential for catastrophic loss to the state or potential loss of life or public safety. There are emergency permit situations, which is one of the reasons why we were building in with the town pre-permit, so that once the erosion hit a particular area, the town could move quickly and halt the erosion in that area to protect the road and water line. In terms of for protection of private property in storm situations, it does not deal with that on an emergency basis.
So it's basically defined as, it doesn't define it specifically to private property, or it's specifically?
The regulations usually typically speak to the significant economic loss to the state, or a threat of public safety or public health, or a threat to the environment. So they're very general and seem to have more regional or statewide application than an individual law.
Well, you know, you know how I feel about this. I think it's beyond emergency situation as far as I'm concerned. And I would say it's probably time to revisit the Red Book, but we won't get into that now. Because we all know we got climate change going on here. And it's been a great document over the years, and it gets amendment, but it's probably time to really look at it through a different set of glasses. But I guess I'm concerned that emergency measures are not distinctly defined. And I guess, do you know if there's a federal emergency situations designated from our federal coastal partners, Army Corps? Do they have a designation, or don't you know what they would consider emergency?
In terms of permitting structures?
Permitting like the water, the type of water change or structural?
They still have to go through a NEPA analysis. The National Environmental Policy Act is sort of the guiding overall arching policy that each of the federal agencies have to meet. So if they were to entertain it, it still has to be through a NEPA analysis. For example, during the oil spill within the Gulf, they were talking about building barrier islands, and there was an attempt by the Corps and others to potentially put those in place without going through a NEPA analysis, and they ultimately backed off of that issue, even given that catastrophic event, without going through the NEPA analysis. And it's the NEPA analysis that brings in all the other federal acts and other provisions.
I would also say to the council members and the coastal council members here that, and I'm sure Representative, I call you Senator Waltz because you used to be a senator, but we stand ready to draft any legislation that needs to be done to speak to the emergency situation. I've already put one bill in, but we stand ready to do that, like now, if not 15 years ago when the South Kingston Council originally got into this. But and we are ready to work with our federal delegation here also to get this moving. We got to get it done. But thank you.
Steve Alford.
I just want to make sure that we're talking about two different things. One is the protection of the road, and two is the protection of the businesses and the village that exists there. It's not just our restaurants that are there, it's also the residential structures. Our main concern at this point is we've been dealing with the issue for 15 years. The erosion that has continued over that 15 years has now limited the number of options that are available, because if a man-made structure were instituted seaward of the businesses, it would now be within the tidal area, which then requires the federal interaction. I think that we've got at this point, in some places, less than 65 feet between where Watermark is and the road. I think that it makes little sense to suggest that if a barrier were put in south of the businesses, that isn't solving an imminent threat. There's over 540 structures that would lose public access if, in fact, that road were compromised. We would not be able to get public safety vehicles in. We would not be able to get residential traffic in. All emergency services would cease until that road was repaired. To me, we've got to look at how do we protect the village. In a catastrophic event, we have to have a pre-application in place to be able to protect the road for public health and safety purposes. But I think that the overall objective has got to be able to protect that village and the existing businesses that are there. But the problem is that the longer we say we don't know where we're going to go, how we're going to do it, the options that are available become less and less. One of the things that I had said at the meeting is that I was hopeful that we could get the council members here, because our position really is one of frustration. We look at it, and when we deal with coastal, we're dealing with the Red Book. In fact, even the memorandum that was referred to tonight, of the 4 items that we discussed on February 18th, clearly just provides reference points to the Red Book as to what are the obstacles that the town or the property owners would have to face. We have been looking for an opportunity to say to the businesses in that area or the homeowners in that area that they should be allowed to be able to provide experimental beach erosion deterrents. And at this point, we keep going back, well, it's a type 1 water, therefore they can't put in a hard structure. Then we're going to talk about that, and we talk about it for another year. And by the time we're done, we're no further ahead, other than the ocean is closer to the road and closer to wiping out the businesses. You know, the charge of the Coastal Council, as you folks are well aware, is to promote, protect, and preserve the waterfront. It's not just to regulate it. And I think that the level of frustration that we've seen from our businesses and from the residents there is the fact that their hands are tied, and all they're seeing is their investments are jeopardized. And to us, as Carol said, the businesses and those property owners are the town's first line of public defense. Our public safety is ensured by them being able to make improvements on their property. So I'm curious whether it's something that the Coastal Council needs to deal with their staff on, in terms of directing that we do set timetables as far as what makes Matunic different from every other place in the state. I haven't heard other areas that have exactly the same problems with businesses about to fall into the drink that are in Rhode Island that would make us similar. If they are there, why don't we do the problem identification at this time to find out why we can't look at Matunic as a specific problem that needs to be dealt with, and if it takes another 5 years, we could potentially have a catastrophic loss there. And I think that that's where our level of frustration has been. It's not that we have difficulty working with the staff. We have difficulty working with the regulations that the staff continues to say has to be met. Classic illustration, when we talk about reclassification of beach or the installation of any type of a man-made structure, we're told that we not only have to prove that it's for imminent threat to public health and safety, but we have to prove that it's that there's no other alternatives. In 2008, we spent money for a pre-hazard mitigation plan. The pre-hazard mitigation plan said, well, gee, one option that they could look at would be to connect Prospect Road to Atlantic Avenue. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever for us to have to spend time to be able to document that that type of a bridge installation to a road that only has a 20-foot wide right-of-way can't work. Yet, those are the types of things that we're concerned with, is that we need to deal with the problem that's before us and be able to get definitive timetables as to when are we going to be able to get answers on how we go forward. Certainly, the town has to do the pre-planning as far as protection of the road if there was a catastrophic storm and we had a piercing of that road. But more importantly, the town needs to be able to assist those property owners in terms of what steps they can take. Because if they take meaningful steps, then it's going to provide us with greater protection of the road and the public safety in that area. But there seems to be a disconnect. The Red Book, I think it was created in the 1970s, is the standards that we're told we have to meet, yet we're not seeing what it is that we have to do to be able to get people to realize that maybe experimental man-made structures by those private property owners, they may not be 100% effective, but they need to have an opportunity to at least try. If they get assent to do it and they're bonded so that they have to be removed if they're not a viable option, then I would think that the coastline's protected. But we don't have that opportunity that we can work with those property owners to define what could be done, and then whether a uniform application can be developed that would provide them with time for us to be able to look at what would the engineering cost be associated with some type of a man-made structure. This is where we are right now, and what we're asking the Coastal Council is to say, what can we do, or can you reflect on the rules that you have, and are there things that you can do to try to work with us as a community? Because we need your help. And from a staff perspective, I think that there's a lot of things that they'd like to be able to help us with, but they're saying the regulations are there. I'm not sure if they need to provide recommendations on the revisions to the regulations so that you can act on those, but the longer this takes, every single year that goes by, there's less and less opportunity for us to be able to protect those businesses and those homeowners.
Thank you, Steve. Councilman Jim O'Neill.
For a novice here, outside of the burritos you talked about, can you describe for us what this wooden bulkhead system is? Size, mass, combinations, how deep effectively it would have to go? And if you're familiar with Matunic, you know how tight all the homes and everything are. How do we do this mechanically and reasonably?
Well, any option that you're looking at in terms of trying to construct something is you're going to have access issues trying to get in and out of that area. There's going to have to be some sort of, I would imagine, some sort of universal access point that gets in and out of there that people can get the equipment down on the beach to go forward. The wooden sheet pile is it's a fairly standard construction material that is being used in many areas. It's driven into what they call refusal, which means that essentially the pile driver or whatever is trying to put the sheet pile in can no longer get that into the material. And that's going to vary tremendously along that piece of shoreline in there because of the underlying geological conditions. You would want to get it ideally about a meter below mean low water, because as the wave action starts to work on that, it will accelerate the erosion in that area because it's a reflective surface, and it will start to eat away at the base of that material, and if it isn't below the mean low water mark, you will start to have failure of components of that wall all along the process. So that's typically what we had considered in the past at looking at in some of these situations. The nice thing about the wooden sheet pile is if at the end of the day it's decided to put in a more permanent structure or that it's not working, the removal cost is fairly negligible. You just essentially take a chainsaw at the sand line and it's gone. But that was the option that we had considered in the past, at looking at this, but it's not without its issues.
Okay, I brought that up because you mentioned that as basically the only other alternative, really.
Well, you're essentially looking for a structural protection measure. There is no such thing as an experimental system that we've seen out there that works. Mostly what we've seen is a lot of snake oil and other types of proposals that, as I said, if this solution existed out there, believe me, there would be billionaires from this, other than the structural options. But the structural options do have their consequences. As you start to go forward, as I said, you will lose lateral access along the shoreline. It will reflect the problem to the adjacent properties. And if you don't construct it to sufficient mass or height, it still will not protect the structures in behind. And with overtopping of wave action, it may still be subject to failure and constant maintenance associated with it. So,
Have any other states tried? I'm very confused. Sometimes in my trips to Florida in the past, they say a lot of the beach renourishment, the compressors offshore, send it, slurry it to shore. A lot of folks say that is federal funding. Some say it's from the state's sales tourist tax.
Right.
I mean, are we missing an opportunity for some money somewhere, or are they not telling me the truth?
it's their funding source. It really depends on the projects. A lot of it are county forms of nourishment that takes place, and a lot of those county forms are either through some sort of tax or levy that's put on to hotel rooms or other tourist events where they're trying to create a beach for tourism. There are also federal projects that are underway, but again, those federal projects are usually for large high-rise enclaves where there's been extensive development, and the Army Corps can justify the flood protection benefits of the beach against the investment in these high-rise structures. So it is a combination. It's not just one funding source.
Yeah, and I guess finally, I'll just finish quickly here. I wish the Red Book would address the economics of various regions in this state. From Westerly to Narragansett, our business is really the water, tourism, restaurants, so on and so forth, boating. That's our business. We don't have a lot of manufacturing down here. We can't find money somewhere else. The cottages we rent, the people that spend money here. Yeah. This is our business. This is why we need, somehow or another, a real focus on this.
And we, believe me, none of the staff likes to sit here and take this constant of frustration that people feel for this issue. We would love to have a solution that addresses all these needs. We're trying to protect habitat, we're trying to protect the sediment source within the beach, and we're trying to balance a number of issues along with the public and private interest in these areas. If we had a solution that could meet those, we would have proposed it a long time ago. It's not that we don't empathize with the property owners. I'm a private property owner. I know exactly what I do to protect my house. So it's not that we don't feel that or want to help. It's just that, unfortunately, there's not a lot of options out there.
Mike?
And I know you want to give the public an opportunity, so if I just may, and then I'll listen again, okay? Just following up on town manager's comments, and I have to say, I sincerely agree with his, it's not on?
Is that on? Pull it up towards you. It's just, okay.
Hello? Does that work better? Okay, sorry. I sincerely agree with the town manager's comments, and I just kind of informally asked the council members, there's no objection up here in changing the Red Book. And we will, and obviously that has to be done in a prudent way. But this council needs, it needs the technical recommendations of its staff to do so. And this council has made recommendation changes presented by the staff to change the Red Book to current conditions of our environment. So with regard to that, this council is willing to do that. provided our staff, and I'm sure they will if they see fit, to make those recommendations. Secondly, with regard to a timetable, I thought that was a good idea as well. I don't think that's something that I should set unilaterally. It's something I think that we should set with the staff to make sure they have ample time to come up with recommendations and that the council members agree. But I just want to say, Town Manager, that we agree with those comments and we thank you for it. Thank you.
Vin Murray.
Discussion of Matunic as a village. You know, the villages in our town are really the backbone of our comprehensive plan, and Matunic is most assuredly one of the most unique settings you could find anywhere, certainly in South Kingstown, Rhode Island, or on the East Coast. And I think one of the things that needs to be stressed about Matunic is what a resilient place it is. Matunic has endured. Many of the structures in this vicinity date back to the 50s or the 40s. In fact, Matunic could be considered for as having the base eligibility as a national historic district area, if that was something. But I mean, that just speaks to its. I think some of the structures along the most critical area were certainly predated 1954 hurricane, and some of them were there, before 1938. So I, think Matunic's a tough little place, and I mean that in the best way. I grew up down there myself, and it's just anything we could do to preserve that village from a community perspective would be an effort well worth undertaking. So.
Further questions here at the table? Grover, I just have one question.
Sure.
So really, what I hear you saying is there is no short-term solution other than putting together these burritos.
Well, the burritos, I mean, we could do today. The other, the bulkhead is going to require some thought in terms of how the town wants to pursue that. Like I said, if it isn't done in a unified approach and you have weak spots, you're going to have problems. So all the property owners have to agree to it. Then the other issue is that it potentially may still touch the mean high water mark, bringing in federal jurisdiction in those permits and that permitting process. Those are issues that, no matter how the council wants to pursue this, there's still going to be those issues that are going to be present with that solution. You're talking a structural approach. I mean, that's what's going to give you time to make a decision whether you're going to pursue a much larger structural approach, basically, is what you're. One's got a very high maintenance cost associated with them. The other one has got more money associated with it, but a lower maintenance cycle than the temporary solution. And then the temporary solution, as I said, is still potentially, depending on the construction standards, still going to be subject to failure. So.
Councilwoman Hagan-McEntee. Thank you.
I just want to follow up on that, and along with what Senator Sosnowski said. When we were talking about this being a state of emergency, and I agree with her, it really is. I mean, it would behoove the federal government seems to be able to cut through red tape when you have a catastrophe like the flood in New Orleans or a hurricane. It would behoove the federal government, and I know there's representatives from Senator Whitehouse and I believe Representative Langevin's office here, and to do something about it before we hit that catastrophic state. And it would seem like it would be much more cost-effective to do it now, protect now, rather than wait till after the road's out and, we need a full-fledged emergency situation where we got to have the National Guard and the whole bit in here, So what I'm saying is, can we find a way to cut through some of that red tape, get through it quickly so we can avoid that situation? And I would hope that they would have a reasonable ear to hear that kind of plea, because it as you know, and we all know, anybody who's been down to Matunic, some of those properties are just about ready to go, one more big storm. And so we really need to, why wait? You know, we don't have the time.
Steve Alford.
Grover, I need a clarification. This is the first time that staff has heard the suggestion that an interim solution is possible with a wooden bulkhead. If in fact that's the case, and you said how the town proceeds on an application, I need clarification as to how would the town proceed? Are you suggesting that CRMC staff and town staff set up a meeting with the Seawood property owners to determine their support for this type of a uniform construction of a wall?
That would be certainly an advisable step. I would.
Well, that's what I'm asking. I'm saying is, it's the first time we've heard it. It's the first time that those folks that own the property out there is asking about it. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I want to have concrete steps that we go from this meeting in terms of the next meeting. And if the next meeting that we should have is for us to invite those property owners in, and for your staff to be able to explain how it would work or how it wouldn't work, or also what the financial commitment they would have to make to that is, for us to get some idea on whether that's a viable option.
Yeah.
Because I know that the main concern anybody's going to have is you can't build one wall without affecting the property next door.
Right.
So if it's going to be done, it's going to take a collaborative effort.
That's correct.
But if you want me to set up that type of a meeting and invite your staff to it, I'm sure I can get all of those property owners in. Because now, is that going to require any type of classification change or a special exception requirement? What provision?
Yeah, first of all, it was in the memo that I gave you, and it's under the temporary measures. If it's considered temporary measures and the council accepts that as a temporary measure, then it can go forward as a recognizing that classification, that this is an interim measure till we pursue a much longer term solution to this problem. But it's buying time for those property owners then to survive these moderate storms. As I said, we get a 100-year storm event, and a lot of those structures are going to be gone because the storm surge in that area is about 19 feet. But in a moderate storm event, this will provide some protection.
Is this similar to what the Ocean Mist has constructed? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, it's similar, but we wouldn't be using creosote material and that type of thing. But yes, it's essentially similar in construction type, yes.
You'd hate to say Kevin did it right.
Well,
I'm joking with you, Glover. I take that back.
Other than the creosote material, he may have done it right. I don't know.
You know I can't go without giving you a hard time.
I know. I'm an easy target tonight.
He is.
It's only begun.
Councilwoman Fogarty?
I know you mentioned about erosion occurring, in other areas, but outside of Block Island, and obviously they had a big issue. Where else in Rhode Island are we really having a major problem? Is there something that's worse than Matunic? Because
Well, we've had major issues in the Misquamicut area before, and the beach down there is taken some severe hits. We've had breaches. We've had breaches occur in a number of systems down there. We've had other areas of the shoreline in the Upper Bay eroded severely, threatening structures. There are people that have actually lost structures in some of these erosion vents. The Green Hill area is one of those that is eroding very rapidly.
That's ours too.
So there are many segments of our shoreline that are disappearing very rapidly, and with sea level rise, it's only going to keep on happening at this point. So.
because I can only see the Green Hill people coming. I mean, I think of Green Hill, I put it all together. It's all ours. It's our baby.
Well, yeah, it's the entire South Shore, and there are elements within the Upper Bay, too, that also have very erosive faces. Paul's town of East Providence has a very erosive bluff there that, when we get major storm events up there that get at the toe of that bluff, the potential for catastrophic loss in that area is also immense, just because of the way bluffs respond and retreat.
It's just that it is the tourist mecca,
Yeah.
really, and it is an economic engine down here that drives a lot
Yeah.
of the state, and, you know, it might be because we're on the council here representing it, but it is important. I don't want to see the mean high watermark being the road.
Yeah.
And that's where I see it happening, and don't bring that red book down here, because it's going to float away.
Yeah.
And if it's 1970s that we're looking at, in the 1970s, they didn't know about, you know, what we're dealing with the.
Well,
the
it's
environment.
it's 1983 that it was updated, and we still look at it to update it on an ongoing basis. But again, you're trying to balance a lot of issues here. That the shoreline is where it all meets and it all happens, and there are a lot of other interests that come into play that we're trying to balance in this. And
I know you're trying to balance it, Grover, but it's tough when you've been sitting here on the council as long as we watch and we take our aerial maps
Yeah,
and you
and
can
it-
see the water, you know, just
Yeah.
creeping up there, and it just absolutely kills you that we sit here and we talk about it, but nothing
Yeah.
has happened. And what Carol was saying before about what's happened in even New Orleans now they're spending millions of dollars. My brother-in-law is one of the engineers, or was one of the engineers, putting, you know, New Orleans back together again,
Yeah.
and the amount of money that they're spending for the concrete, it's the
It's
ounce of
mind-boggling,
prevention
yeah.
versus the pound of cure. You know, it's
It-
just, it's here,
Yeah.
it's here, and we've got to do something. I don't know how we're going to do with the bulkhead
Yeah.
and how we're going to pay for it all, but I don't want to lose that road and all those,
Yeah.
the businesses and the houses. That village is just too important to
One-
everybody in the state.
Yeah, one of the things that we are working, and again, it's not an immediate solution to this, and the response is not going to be immediately seen, but we're also working on a potential project of trying to dredge out an Inigrid pond and put that material back in system, which obviously the longshore drift is from west to east in this area here. So that material will move along the shore and
And we did that
provide
with the
some,
Corps
but.
of Engineer
yeah.
out of, you know,
Yeah.
the salt pond there.
So we do try to find solutions, but unfortunately, the money's very limited in terms of some of these options. And the other considerations that you have to look at sometimes hold you back. As I said, we as staff understand the desire and the want of the people to protect their property and prevent it from going in. But we also have a set of regulations and other federal processes that come into place, and also we have to think about the consequences of some of the other actions that we may precipitate too.
Councilman O'Neill?
Actually, I can wait on a few of my questions. I'd really love to hear from the public, because I'm sure we've missed a lot of information questions that they may have.
I think that's a great idea. And we will follow up back with questions here at the table after we hear from the public. And later on, Steve, if you could just update us on the filing of the applications, what the status is and where that's at, maybe later. Okay? Okay. The mic is open. Please come forward, and if you could state your name. Welcome.
Hi there. My name is Mark Melnick. I'm from 929 Mutunick Beach Road. And I'm kind of new to this all. I've only been in this area about 3 years and new to the madness. My biggest thing is I'm just coastal. I don't understand you. You guys were formed in '71. And as I sit here and look at your website and on the government, it says your job is to preserve, protect, develop, and where possible, restore the coastal resources of the state for this and succeeding generations through the comprehensive and coordinated long-range planning and management designed to produce the maximum benefit for society for such coastal resources. What have you been doing for the last 30, 40 years? I mean, you've known about this problem. Near as I can tell, for 15 years you guys went back. So what have you been doing? What has Coastal done for us other than slap us with fines tell us to put on sandbags, which don't work. We knew that years ago. So now we have a beach that's disappeared. We have a road about to be breached. And now you're finally coming to the table? Can you respond to that at all?
Mark, if you could just address the questions here.
I'm sorry.
That would be great.
Sorry.
Okay, but we definitely hear the frustration.
Is there any response?
If at some point, Grover, you did want to come and make a response, you could come forward. Otherwise, you could go to the mic. Sorry, Grover.
That provision that was just cited talks about a lot of natural systems and natural processes that are in place and long-range benefit of the environment back. We also have federal obligations that we have to meet as part of our federal approved program. For instance, we're supposed to direct development out of areas where they're subject to erosion, sea level rise, inundation, coastal storm hazards, and those types of things. So the federal program actually looks at trying to move development out of many of these areas rather than allowing development to occur in these areas. So we have both a balance of trying to understand the dynamics of the system to make sure that the decisions that we're making are healthy for the entire state and not just a few individuals. And then we also are trying to meet federal obligations, which in many cases would be contrary to some of the actual siting of properties or development within these areas. The federal government prefers to try to keep development out of these areas that are subject to erosion, storm surge, sea level rise, and all the other because of the damage and the flood damage payouts that occur to this. So,
Grover, can I just follow up to Mark's question? So are there any areas here in the state that have been preserved and protected, with the beachfront?
the beachfront, I think if you look at your barrier systems, you've got some of the healthiest barrier systems in the New England area here. If you look at the coastal wetlands, we have some of the best coastal wetlands. We preserved and protected a lot of coastal environments in this area, and also preserved a lot of coastal-related businesses along with that. We have a dual obligation under the Federal Coastal Zone Management Act to not only try to protect certain areas, but also to provide for certain coastal-dependent development. And we are one of the reasons, for instance, that the marine industry is thriving in the state versus in many other states it's been in a decline. So there's been a lot of actions taken by the Coastal Council that do result in the protection. And if you were to look at this shoreline, say, versus Connecticut, Massachusetts, or some of these other areas, it is a relatively pristine, desirable place to be. Yet we are one of the most densely populated shorelines in the United States. So there has been a balancing and protection that's been going on here to provide for this wonderful environment that everybody wants to get to and be next to, versus many other areas of the country where it's not as desirable or nice to be next to. So the council's program is recognized as probably one of the best in the nation in terms of its policies and its ability to try to balance all those needs. So.
My name is Frank. Ooh, hello. Is that how it works? My name is Fran O'Brien. I'm a co-owner of Tara's Joyce Family Pub in Matunic. And I just have a few different thoughts, but I will say my own experience. I have dealt with the staff people of CRMC. I found them open. They've made themselves available. It appears to me quite often that they have a job to do, and I think we need to question what their job is, although Mark has made that pretty clear. But I think sometimes it may be the regulatory tail wagging the dog. I mean, their hands are tied, I think. So I think we have to untie them, number one. But, and other than layman's, Science 101, I don't have any science background. But Grover, I've looked at a number of systems, and again, I don't know if they work or they don't. But I've seen systems, for example, and instead of sheet piles, it would be something akin to that, with holes, and it allows water through rather than fighting it, and then sand accretes to the beach on the landward side, on the seaward side. And there's any number of them that have been in use since the mid-1970s. They seem like they work. They've worked around the world. They've worked in America, in the United States. They've worked in Massachusetts. They've worked in New Jersey. They worked in Hawaii. And I honestly, not to be glib, I sincerely question. You talked about a silver bullet. I wonder, is there not a silver bullet available? We just don't have a gun permit. You know what I mean? It's like, well, this might work, but well, you can't because the rule says you can't. And that I think is my frustration. I think people are doing their jobs. I think, again, we have to untie their hands and undo the handcuffs or whatever way you want to put it. But I think there may be solutions. Some that I've looked at are not outrageously, some of the suggested remedies are $25 million. I don't know where you're going to get the $25 million. But I've looked at systems, I've spoken to people around the country that have used them, and they're probably, 5% the cost of some of the more expensive ones. They're all a lot of money. And I will just close with this. When I got involved in Matunic, somebody said to me, do you think the government will help you? And I sincerely mean this. And I said, I don't care that they help me as long as they don't stop me. And that's my feeling now is I'm not asking taxpayers to worry about my problem. I think coincidentally we can solve our problem and the town's problem with the road. But I'm not here looking for money. I'm just looking to let me protect my property.
I'm sure there's more people that want to speak. If you could come to the microphone.
My name is Kevin Finnegan. I live in Matunic at the Ocean Mist. There is a lot going on, I guess, from what I understand. So this is coming from, I went to the same school Fran did, 101. Science, I don't have a background in that. But I think there is a solution. If you look at that map that you have right up there, from roughly the town beach on the west side, and if you follow that line and go to the beginning of East Matunic, which is the beginning of East Matunic on, towards the east, 60-70% of that is already hard structured. If you connected the dots, or you let us connect the dots, or whoever connects the dots, immediately your problem would be over. I could connect my dot, so he doesn't have to worry about at least behind me. Then when you get into the science of what Grover's saying, it's all great. He's worried about what little sand is left in front of the Ocean Mist going into this system. If you go by that theory, which I can't argue that theory, but there's more sand in the Harbor Refuge. There's more sand in every Charleston Reachway that should have been pumped out, I believe, since when it was built in 1918. I think it's documented there that they were supposed to maintain and pump that out every 2 years. So this is 2011, and it hasn't been done. So to throw smoke like global warming and things like that into it, that's all cool, but that's 50 years away. Global warming is not causing what's in Matunic right now. Just connect those dots. It's not going to affect any striped bass or flounder or eelgrass or any of those things. We shouldn't even be talking about that stuff. The immediate thing to do is to let me, Fran, property owners, protect your road. If you can, help with that financing, absolutely, you know what I mean? But where we're really trapped now, which Steve brought up, is that the 15-year process here, and it's been longer than that, but 15-year process, now I have to deal with the feds now, technically, because I'm touching their waters, where if I was I knew what to do in 1988. It's been no different. And it's very, I guess, more educated scientists or whatever. They're really going around in circles. You need education. You need, with that education, whether you're an engineer, whatever you are, you need experience and you need common sense. Without getting into trouble here, or because I would certainly have a beer with you anytime. I'm not insulting anyone, but I think the education is there, but the experience and the common sense is not. And it's kind of that's what's holding up. Just like what Fran just said. We have the silver bullet, and we don't have the gun permit. That was like a perfect analogy, or perfect whatever. That's what you need to, my layman's point of view, like when I don't shake when I talk to Steve because I'm not in this environment, but it's there. Just connect those dots. Start where, Mary Carpenter's wall, she's been protecting your road way before me. And she's been dealing with a lot of crap, and not being allowed, hands tied. But if she let that wall go before I was there, this road would have been going a long time ago. Now it's me. I spend and you get into economics. Instead of me spending $20,000 to $70,000 a year for burritos and sandbags, no disrespect, it's ridiculous. That's every year I spend that. The ocean mist should be protected already. That wall should have been there 15 years ago. There should be a brand new septic system in there, not a holding tank that gets pumped out by a diesel truck at $50,000 a year to take poo-poo and pee-pee away every year, 50 grand. So that would be 50 grand in my pocket, which I've proven that I put it back into Matunic. I'm not a greedy guy. I live frugally. If the ocean mist was protected 15 years ago, and Franz and Matunic, we maybe could be looking into like solar energy, wind power, green septic systems, more progressive things forward, but we've been stuck in this backwoods bureaucracy for so long. We can't, I'm the greenest guy in the world. I've saved more flounder, crippled seagulls in front of my bar, not, just, so that's what you need to do. Connect the dots. That's part of the first system. And then replenish the beach. That's take the sand out of where it is. And it's been there since the Harbor Refuge and all these other things that have been there. That should have been addressed years ago before I was born. And those are the multi things. So that's pretty much all I think I got to say. I hope I made it clear. Whatever. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Further comments from the public?
Janice Loisel at 218 Peninsula Road.
Pull that down. Yeah.
I just wanted, I thank the two representatives from the senators' offices, because what I'm hearing is that our hands are tied by regulations that are at the federal level. So I'm wondering whether what needs to happen is a meeting with our congressional delegation to say, how do we get them untied at the federal level? We're in an emergency situation. Let's talk and say, how do we do this before we do get to a true emergency situation? How do we cut the red tape there? Because I don't think we can cut it necessarily at the state level. These are, we're saying once you get past the state level, then we have, you're touching federal waters, and now we go to the federal rules. Maybe it needs to be at multiple levels, these discussions, and see whether we can get them changed at the federal level as well as the state level.
Thank you, Janice. Great suggestion.
Just to comment on that, Janet, we have met with the officers. In fact, they're here with us tonight because they have been advised of what the issues are, and they are doing that research. I think the biggest problem that you have is that you're dealing with huge federal laws. You're dealing with Clean Water Act. You're dealing with with some major federal protocols that have to be met. How you carve out from that, I'm not sure if that's possible. I think the real question is there any type of federal assistance that's available in terms of being able to determine whether experimental opportunities are out there that have been viable and have worked? It may be that we need to get that type of research done, or if there's dollars that's available to look at engineering. Kevin's right. When we look at, if a seawall, in a perfect world, there were no regulations and we were going to install a seawall, you're probably talking about a seawall that would have to start at the Matunic Trailer Park, which would be the initial landing area. And you would work out from there because of the problem that you would have. You have to have the ability to get the equipment in to be able to install those type of walls. As soon as that goes into the past the high water mark, that's where we're in with the federal requirements. I think something else that also needs to be brought forward is one of the other concerns that we have in terms of going forward is not everybody is in agreement with putting any type of structure in place. Some of the major concerns that haven't been addressed tonight that will occur and be brought forward as we go forward in this process is the beach access. And there will most likely be action brought to try to prevent the council from moving forward with anything that's going to prevent somebody from getting from the water to the shore itself. So there are a number of obstacles in addition to the federal regulations that we'll be dealing with.
Thank you.
Yes, good evening. My name is Jay Keeler. I live at, I have 3 cottages at 935 Matunic Beach Road. They were known as the Ahern cottages to the people that were familiar with the area. I've spent summers out here. I've spent summers out here since 1985. I hope that I will be spending, my wife and I will be spending winters out here shortly, as we have plans to winterize our cottages. I've watched the beach come and go. Mostly the hurricanes have brought in the sand. That would be Gloria and Bob. I was actually there in the cottage for both of those. I was fortunate to witness a storm surge on Hurricane Bob. And those 2 storms, particularly Gloria, hit at direct low tide, a dead low tide, excuse me. Bob hit at about a 3rd tide. And they hit with direct onshore winds. And Kevin can testify to this also, Kevin Finnegan. In both of those storms, we picked up a tremendous amount of beach, 15 to 30 feet laterally and about 5 feet deep, because the waves were high enough above the water surface and deep enough, as high as they are above, they are deep below. And they pick up the sand that is in the deep water. Again, it hit at low tide, so it got the sand and it brought it in. We're not getting the natural lateral flow anymore. The littoral flow is what they call it, the east and west flow of sand. We really don't have any sand on the Matunic, I don't know what to call it, the bluffs. That's been moving, and it moves east, it moves west primarily, and that's been eroded over time. It hasn't been replenished, and I don't want to go, I happen to be an engineer. It's not getting replenished because of the breakwater associated with the harbor, but I don't want to get too complicated, but we're not getting the lateral flow. The 2 wall structures, Mary's wall and the trailer wall, inhibit the lateral flow of sand, so we're not getting fed with sand anymore. Once those walls get out to low tide, at low tide, they block the lateral flow. So the only kind of replenishment we can get from nature is from a hurricane that hits at low tide with direct onshore winds. Those are extremely rare events. We were fortunate to have 2 of them, as I said, Bob and Gloria. I wonder if anyone has evaluated how much sand we have lost in that area for the last, over maybe the last 10 years. I know there's been mapping, I've seen it in the newspapers. I did a quick calculation on my property, and if you take 60 feet of ocean frontage and you take 30 feet, well, let's go 60 feet of beach towards the water from the dune, 6 feet in height, which is about my height. That represents 2 triaxles per lineal foot of beach. That's my calculation. The problem is everyone has to get together and we have to have access points to implement anything such as a beach replenishment. 2 truckloads per lineal foot, or even 3 truckloads per lineal foot of beach, if you had proper access in what I've heard from coastal, might be something that would be an interim solution, because we're no longer getting the lateral flow. Kevin Finnegan talks about it. They're not dredging out the places where the sand is ending up and putting it in Matunic. So I just throw that out, that maybe that wants to be looked at. Kevin spends a lot of money on his property. I know Mark, my neighbor, does. Mary does also. A lot of us spend money on our property. I personally have no problem contributing money to beach replenishment. Thank you.
Did anybody want to respond to the beach replenishment? Further comments from the audience?
These microphones can be intimidating, you know.
Hi, my name is Chris. I own property at 921 Matunic Beach Road, and
Chris, could you just state your last name, please?
Chris Sinnott.
Thank you.
I'm a contractor in the state of Rhode Island, and I read all the business tabulations on projects that come out, architectural and engineering services, and I read a fair amount of proposals, and I know that the town of Narragansett has an RFP for engineering services for beach replenishment. I don't know how big or the scope of the job is, but it may be an opportunity if they're going to mobilize a company from Maryland or whatever to come up here and do whatever they're looking at doing. It may be an opportunity to combine the engineering services of whoever they awarded that project to, and we could probably get a pretty good discount, maybe piggyback on a 2 jobs at once approach, depending on what you agree on or where this goes after tonight. But that's just another thing to maybe consider, that Narragansett's already moving forward on that. And I don't know, that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Councilwoman Hagan McEntee, did you want to respond?
Yes, I guess, Grover, I wanted to ask you a question. One of the things I wanted to know is, Fran O'Brien brought up a specific type of wooden piling, I believe. I'm not sure what he was talking about, but are you familiar with he's the one who owns Joyce's Pub?
Yeah, we're familiar with it. There's a number of systems that purport to break up wave competence, and particularly as the wave starts to retreat from the shore, to capture sediment and deposit it on the beach. There's been a series of systems actually in use, in experimental use here in Rhode Island. One of them is called Dune Guard, which is it's like a very heavy-duty polymer fence that's supposed to break up the wave and then cause the wave to deposit its bed load on the beach and in theory build up the beach. But anytime we get any type of storm event at all, that material disappears like that. In terms of a long-term solution, it really doesn't seem to do much, and it does create a lot of debris after the storm because these systems typically haven't survived in these. So we're aware of them, we've looked at them, we've tried to evaluate them in terms of their potential for here, but there hasn't been a system that seems to, once you get a storm, that keeps the material in place. It all goes, and it can go quite rapidly at times. So.
And what did you think of the last comments from Jake about the beach replenishing? I mean, that seems like somewhat of a reasonable option.
Beach nourishment is a great option if you can find a sediment source, and what the town of Narragansett, I believe, is looking at is dredging out portions of the Narrow River and bringing that material over to their beach to nourish that beach. As I indicated, we also are looking at, right now within the governor's proposed budget, there's some money for a South Shore project for beach, these projects, and one of the projects that's under consideration right now is to look at Ninigret. There is as one of the gentlemen indicated, when these breachways were built in the 1950s, they actually accelerated the deposition of material on the inside of the ponds and causing a choking off of these ponds. So we've been working with the Army Corps to dredge this material out and put it back into system. And when those breachways were designed, they were designed with what's called a settling basin. So as the sediment comes in, it slows and stops in that basin and fills up. Our basin that we just dredged is now filled up and needs another maintenance dredge to dredge that material and put it back out into the system again. These are all good, soft solutions that give you beach, give you the benefits of what you're looking for, but they're also very costly projects, and we just haven't, even with the Ninigret one, we're looking at a cost share with the town. The town is potentially going to put up approximately $300,000 against the state money to achieve that beach nourishment and the maintenance of that system. But they're a great idea if you can find the sediment source and the money.
Thank you.
Councilman O'Neill?
Grover, I'm sorry. Gee, we should have had you, given you a seat over here this evening. I certainly know that Charlestown Breachway has begun to fill again after the Army Corps.
That's the one we're talking about.
Right. And some fishermen and lobstermen tell me there are just tons of sand offshore. But is that true? And are there pockets of, do we need the hurricane at a low tide to give us that back and the right wind? But are there huge pockets of sand offshore? I mean, you must have aerial photos. We know in the ponds
if
where they're
we could,
accumulating.
If we could identify it through an aerial photo, that would be great, but typically it requires a technique called side scan sonar. And we have been doing a lot of work on the shore face trying to understand the storm dynamics, why certain segments of shoreline are going much more rapidly than others. And unfortunately, the shoreline here in the South Kingstown area is one of those that's going much more rapidly than other areas of the state. But there are deposits of sand out there, but you need some sort of large-scale operation to get that material back on shore and back into the system. And you have to do it at a point which is beyond what's called the closure depth. The closure depth is a depth at which the sediment that's in system will still continue to be in play and to potentially move on shore. So you don't want to affect that sediment supply, which may potentially nourish your beaches. You want to go beyond that and start to take sediment that's been lost to the system for the long term and move that on shore. But those are large-scale hydraulic dredge operations that can do that. As also been pointed out, there is quite a bit of material, and we have tried to explore options with the Army Corps and other federal entities about trying to get some of that material out of the Harbor of Refuge. There is a tremendous sediment source in that that potentially could nourish beaches also. We're also working with the Army Corps on Little Narragansett Bay, and the dredging of all that material is going to go back for beach nourishment along those projects. Our preferred method, which we push the Corps for all the time, is if the material is compatible to use it for beach nourishment, because our beaches need the sand, and our whole longshore transport needs that sand to make it a healthy system.
Do you know what the dollar cost was for the Army Corps when they, for the Charlestown Breachway, and just how many cubic yards? Is there any way to measure that with some comments tonight? Should we be trucking in sand?
Well, yes. I mean, Dan Golay of our staff his job is to look at those issues. He's the Marine Infrastructure Coordinator for the council, and we've been costing out operations to look at that. Dan, I don't know if you've got, but typically the mobilization and demobilization is a very large component. That can account for, approximately 200,000 of the total cost? And then, of course, you're limited by the time of year that you can do that, too. So that's usually a November, December operation that occurs.
I mean, it's absolutely phenomenal how much sand, Charlestown Beach near the Breachway, how much sand. It looked like the Sahara Desert. You had so much sand.
Yeah.
I don't know where it's gone since then. I think it's back in the Breachway. But,
I think it's been moving down to Point Judith and then...
Further questions here at the table? Questions from the audience?
If I could briefly, sitting here listening to the comments, clearly there's an environmental problem. There's a practical problem. My building's going to fall in the ocean. That's a real problem for me. There's clearly an environmental problem. As Grover says, how do you balance the competing interests if there are any? But throughout all of it, there's a cash problem. Where does the money come from? I just want to take a minute. This is a report that was done in 2008, and it says the findings of this. It's estimated that U.S. beaches contribute more than $320 billion annually to the national economy. This, I guess, is directed to our friends from Senators Reid and White House's office. $320 billion to the national economy, more than 25 times what national parks bring in. It goes on to say that for every dollar invested annually, Washington receives $320 in tax revenues. This says it's an incredible return on investment. That's a 2008 report that was done by the Army Corps of Engineers. That's their opinion. But a question that I had, Steve, does anyone know at this point, let's say that the road breached and then Matunic is now an island. Has anyone quantified the dollar and cents effect on the town, the tax base, or anything like that?
I think that even if the road was breached, our first responsibility would be to reinstate the road in some form or fashion. So certainly we know what the property values are. They're well over $100 million that would be east of that breach point. But we're not looking at losing Matunic. So no, I'm not spending a lot of time on that. But certainly we know what's out there, and we know what we have to protect in terms of being able to get public safety in and out of there. And I think that's one of the things that Grover had raised at the meeting that we had in February was if there was a catastrophic event and there was a road breach, to get a pre-application in place to be able to move immediately to be able to do the repairs necessary to be able to get that road back open. You know, we're not going to solve the problems at the Vanilla Bean. We're still going to get wash over there, and we're going to have times that we're going to have trouble getting vehicles other than big trucks through there. But that's not the area where we see the penetration occurring. The penetration would occur around where the restaurants are. Probably a little bit to the east of the ocean mist. And I think the main concern we have too is that if that road were to breach and we weren't able to make the repairs, it would have profound impact on Potter's Pond. Because the topography, once you get past that road itself, is into the swamp. Once you get into the swamp, all of the inundation is also going to have its toll on the island and on Prospect Road. And if the seawater gets into Potter's Pond, what impact is it going to have on the salinity value of that pond and the estuary that's there? So it's a broader problem than just the beachfront properties or the road. It's the environmental issue of that village. And I think that's the theme that we're trying to get across, is that we need the help, and the longer we wait, the less opportunity we have. But, you know, cost-wise, the study that was done on the hazard mitigation study, which drove us crazy, because it was looking at hazard mitigation in all different areas, whether it was hurricanes, floods, and one of the things that they were tasked to do was to look at different options as far as being able to protect that beach. When they came up with I mean, that night got out of hand because they started talking about the bridge to nowhere. And we have to get past that. They also were looking at a man-made structure that would have really gone all the way to High Point. Obviously, when they started throwing numbers out, it was $20 million. What we're looking at is that if there was a solution that we saw as viable, it certainly wouldn't extend to that point. It would probably be from the trailer park, Matunic Trailer Park, to about where the breakers are. Because from there, then you've got high ground, there's upland there. That is a much more defined area to be able to try to come up with a solution for. And that's what we're hoping, you know, in terms of our work with Coastal, to see if we can come up with a solution. But that's not cheap either. The initial prices that we've seen, the company that's doing work in Massachusetts right now on the type of seawall, I think they're talking about $5,300 a linear foot. And when you look at the area that we're talking about, you'd have about 1,750 linear feet. So make that 9.3 million, then put the engineering for another, you're up at 10 million. Just a steel sheathing wall that would be road protection, you're running someplace in the area of $3,000 a linear foot. Obviously, there you're dealing with penetration points rather than an extended distance. But all of these things are much bigger dollars than either the property owners or the town is capable of addressing without providing some type of support, hopefully through the federal government. And some of the costs get driven up because of the federal regulations. So, I mean, those are the types of numbers that we're looking at. And until you have the actual engineering done to find out what the point of resistance is and how far the sheathing would have to go down, or whether the sheathing could go down, because in some places there, you've got stone that's out on in the area where you would be putting the sheathing. So then that creates other problems. So it's not a simple solution that we can come up with, but it's one that we've got to work with everybody to try to find common ground. But I think that the key right now is that there needs to be interim solutions looked at, which buy time for everybody, and we don't see additional erosion occurring. Because the catastrophic event will put us into an immediate action plan if it were to occur. We'd be forced to, because we can't allow that area to go without some type of service.
Address, I'm not a fearmonger. I've been, probably the, calmest person down there for 25 years, and it'll come back, it'll go. But address, you mentioned you had 65 feet to the road. Well, that met like half hour ago. On the west side of the Ocean Mist. When was that? Like 45, 70 days ago? Like, good idea. I don't need, but it was. The 65 feet, just to make a point, the breach, like, the vanilla bean, water comes in, water goes over the road, you go down there with a backhoe, costs you a couple $1,000s, whatever it is. Everyone's got to get back to normalcy, I think, within a couple hours or whatever. If it breaches, it's going to breach, my educated guess, is going to breach. Mary Carpenter owns a little piece of property, not the big piece, which is the west of the Ocean Mist, in my property. It's positively, absolutely going to breach, because what just happened in 40 days, it went from 65 feet, you have 12 feet. So you can talk about, and I'd love to talk to you or talk to everybody about all of this. It's all very positive what's going on tonight. I think all the planets are aligned. Everybody's talking about good stuff. Stop talking about, in a sense, beach replenishment is good. It's a pot to the puzzle. There's like a 3-pot probably solution here, a 4-pot or whatever. But the 1 pot, you won't be able to get to 2 and 3 and 4 if you don't, which I'll do right now, if he gives me the permit to, and it will buy you plenty of time, or buy you more time, to put up a bulkhead. I got pictures of them. They're basic bulkheads. Everybody knows what a bulkhead is. There's one on my property now that appeared with the erosion. Narragansett Dock Works, reputable people can come in and speak normally. I'm applying for permits right now for a bulkhead for my 150 feet of beach. So that's, and I'll pay for that. If there's government grants, I'm protecting your road also. That would probably buy you more time, because then Fran's next, because the beach coastline goes like this. So I'm just, I'm the funnel. I'm in the beginning down there. I would say if me and Fran did what we needed to do, you could maybe have these discussions briefly, shortly. But you really are, like, come right down there right now. You've got 12 feet before your road is breached. That's a fact. That is a fact, You know what I mean? It's been breached. The water used to go over, Steve, once every 10 years. It went 6 or 8 times last year, or 5 times, or whatever the deal. It's kind of like, stop talking about all the beach replenishment and all. Those are all things you need to talk about. But you're putting the cart before the proverbial horse. You need to talk about, it just happened to be not me, but a little bit of Mary Carpenter's property, which is the west of me. The little section where the 2 little houses were. You've got 12 feet there. You've got about 12 or 13 feet under the Ocean Mist. And then, that's going to happen, right? I'm surprised it didn't happen last week or the week before. So, you're way beyond emergency. Way beyond, like, yeah, the stabilizes. So, like, I'm just saying, back to what Fran said, is I do have the silver bullet, and it's not rocket science. It's just basic. You need a hot structure. You're not going to affect nothing. You're not going to hurt anything. Stop talking about the other areas. Green Hill, it's great. That's a good conversation, but you're wasting your time. You know what I mean? You're really, I'm not superseding you, but I sit on the beach 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I got something, yeah, no, but I mean, it's something like, his education and basic knowledge, but we don't even need to talk. You have 12 feet, and it went from 65 feet to 12 feet in 90 days. You know what I mean? That's, so, you make that financial decision. I've got applications in, they're going in, RP Engineering put them in. If you give me that permit, or the red tape is your business, you can keep talking about red books and go around in circles. It's wasted 15 years, so now we got to go to the feds now, because we're touching their water, where if we addressed this identical problem 15 years ago, the feds wouldn't even be in the picture. You're going to have, it's going to happen. So, don't, like, if you even said to me, hey, we got to get rid of the Ocean Mist to save Matunic, I'm not I would say, that sucks, but I would get rid of the Ocean Mist to save that road. You know what I mean? But it's stupid to save the road without saving, the property owners. It's the same. It's one and the same. It's just you're gonna put a hot structure either behind me or in front of me. You know, it's, when do you want to do it? So it kind of, like, all these other conversations are great. They're very positive. It's very, I'm glad to finally meet you or whatever. But it's, you got to stop talking about it. It's time to just do it. You really do.
Grover, could you address the bulkhead?
As I indicated, and I've been saying essentially the same thing that he's been saying, is that you're talking a structure. And the wooden bulkhead is the quickest and easiest way to get in there to deal with the structure, which is what we outlined as one of the options back in February 28th. So that's about all I can say.
Further questions from the audience, the public? Could you please come to the mic? I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, he's a loud one.
It's just that the tape won't pick it up. Thank
I
you.
did have one question.
Could you just state your
My
name?
name's
I'm
Robert
sorry.
Atkinson. I
Thank
live
you.
on Schoolhouse Road, but I also own 2 structures down in Matunic. I grew up in Matunic from 1947 on. One of my questions is, the change that we initially talked about at the beginning of the meeting from type 1 to type 2, does that need to take place before the people can do the wooden barriers? Or can that be done immediately?
If the council authorizes as a temporary measure, it can be done immediately. And our engineering staff has already been drafting up standards to look at it. So, no, it doesn't require, but as we indicated, it's with the understanding there's this temporary measure. If you're going to go with a structural solution to this, you're better off going with a much more massive permanent structure than these wooden bulkheads. These wooden bulkheads are not going to have the survivability of say, a revetment, a stone revetment. But it buys you that time to get to that solution, if that's the way it goes.
Okay.
Grover, do we still have to go through the federal regulations and the permits if we do the bulkhead, or can we bypass that?
I know that people have been talking 15 years ago. Our experience is that people want to get the maximum amount, and so they don't want to carve back into their property. The only way you can do that is avoid that mean high water mark. If those properties have room to get back so that they're not touching that mean high water mark, then it's just a council permit that would be issued. As soon as they touch the mean high water mark, you bring in the Army Corps permit under Section 10. You may potentially trigger what's called a 404 permit under the Clean Water Act, and that also would bring in DEM jurisdiction. So to the extent that they can bring those walls inside the mean high water mark, they greatly ease their permitting problems, even if that means cutting into their property a little.
So as I understand it, then the wooden structures can be done just about immediately with the permits, correct? And then how long would it take for it to be changed from type 1 to type 2?
Well, it would take about 90 days to go through the regulatory process, but you don't necessarily have to change it from type 1 to type 2 in order to pursue the special exception of the town. But that is, it certainly lessens the regulatory hurdles if it goes that way. There's no doubt.
So in other words, we can do the temporary wooden barriers immediately upon approval with a permit, but then once it's changed to type 2, then we go with a more permanent structure, correct? Okay. The other thing that hasn't been really mentioned tonight at all is the fact that if the wall is breached and if Potter Pond does fill up with water, not only do you have a problem with structures, but you got a life problem. People are going to be trapped there. I mean, yes, there's going to be emergency services run down there, but that's something that also has to be looked at too, is the the possibility of life being threatened with a breach. The other thing, the last thing is it all an old catchphrase that I never used to like the catchphrase, but it's better to be proactive than reactive. And really, this is an emergency. It's gotten to the emergency situation right now. So I think that, whether it's here in the town level or the state level, I think that, we need to get the state people involved and the federal people involved to change the rules, the regulations, the things that need to be done so that this does get moving. And we're not standing here or sitting here 2 or 3 months from now still arguing the same stuff. Thank you.
Madam President, if I may, I know it's getting to be a late hour, and I think if I can make a suggestion, and we could perhaps move on and get some results. I'm hearing tonight, and I have to honestly say for the first time about these wooden structures, and I guess I'm also hearing that this council has to approve those wooden structures. And I just informally polled the members, and I think I'd like to instruct the Deputy Director Willis to poll the council members tomorrow to see if we can meet next week, and we'll meet here, to try to hear that matter and listen to the staff's recommendation on these wooden structures, and also ask that the staff of CRMC and the staff of South Kingstown get together with respect to those wooden structures prior to that meeting. And obviously, the sooner that happens, the sooner we can convene. And then also, I'd like to ask our staff to come up with any recommendations that they think are necessary in the Red Book that need to be changed. And lastly, ask our staff to come up with a recommendation relative to the water type change. So that's what I heard, and I think first and foremost is for the two staffs to get together with respect to these wooden structures that, and I understand the cost behind it, but I think from our point of view, if we can at least move what we can move to keep the ball rolling, then the state has done its job. So Madam President and members of the council, I hope you agree with that position, and if there is anything different, please let us know and we'll accommodate.
I just have a few things to add to the to-do list,
Okay.
Mike, thanks, and it's not necessarily all on CRMC. I'm in agreement, the bulkhead, and I appreciate you moving that forward with a meeting here in South Kingstown for next week. I appreciate that. That's wonderful. And looking at reclassifying type 1 to type 2 and Red Book changes. I also heard, and I thank Donna Walsh and Senator Cisnowski for possibly moving forward some legislative. That would be absolutely fabulous, and I think that would be well appreciated. I also see the application process on our side of the town. I know that those applications have started to apply. So they will be completed. And I also know, I was very grateful that, I believe it's Robert Atkinson, brought up the evacuation plan. We do need an emergency plan, and we really would appreciate, and we know that we have had that in the past, if there is a means that we need to evacuate, we know that we will have the support of all the residents there so that we can make sure that you are safe. So that's another thing on the town council's plate here. We will come up with that. We also need a meeting, I believe it was stated, with the businesses and the town so that we are definitely all on the same plate, same page here. We need that before we move forward. What was it? Right, and Carol's bringing it forward that we also probably need the residents also on board with us so that we're all together on this, as well as the businesses. And I also think that it would be nice if Coastal Resources Management Council could really look at and answer that question, why is Matunic different? And I think that you've heard an ample amount of statements tonight why Matunic is different. The historic, the 2,000 people, what we've already lost, how close we are, the emergency, state of emergency that we're in. I think that we are different, and I'm hoping that we're not compared and action is taken ASAP. And then the last thing is the timetable that really needs to come forward with Coastal Resources Management Council from the staff. So I think that is the to-do list. Councilman O'Neill, did you have a comment?
Michael, what does it take for a quorum? Do you have enough people? Do you have enough support tonight that we will not be looking at May, June, July for, can you help us out with that?
You had to bring that up.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
We have 8 members.
8? Wow.
Right now. 7 are required for a quorum.
Okay.
We have 1 member in Florida. So the 7 of us have been diligent in trying to attend every single meeting that's necessary so as to not to have the state's business come to a grinding halt.
I certainly appreciate that. I felt a lot
And
of
I would like to stress that your 2 legislative participants here, Senator Sosnowski and Representative Walsh, have been diligent at the State House to assure that this council does get full membership. And I have to say that sincerely, and they've done it over the years as well.
And if I could address one more question to Grover, because Mr. Finnegan was very eloquent tonight. Where is mean high water with Tara's Joyce Family Pub as well as the Ocean Mist? Is it under the buildings or still in front of the buildings? Well, Grover or Kevin, can one of you answer that?
No.
Well, you know, I know I don't want, all right, I mean, again, this federal issue, as I said at the opening statement tonight, we need to be grandfathered in for 15 years, looking back on this. And also, too, what everyone's brought up tonight, and Ella just said, the situation in Mattoonic is historic. The village has been there for a couple of centuries, maybe longer. You're not talking about somebody building McMansion. A development was mentioned tonight on Cape Hatteras and the islands. Knocked down, build it back up, knocked down, and really taking advantage of the government and the flood rules. This is a community that's been here for centuries and really deserves our respect and our attention. So we appreciate somehow or another if you can isolate this with its importance, not just public safety, but value to the community.
I failed to mention David Abaddon at the end. He's also a council member, came in late and didn't have an opportunity to mention David, but David's with us as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I will pass this yellow sheet back. Okay, at this time, I think we are ready to adjourn unless there's any further questions. Okay, and my parting remarks is, again, thank you, CRMC. Thank you, Michael. Senator Sosnowski, Representative Walsh, staff. And definitely a big thank you to the public. Thank you for your participation. Meeting is adjourned.